Everyone, my name is Mike Blight. I am a communication professor at a private institution in the Chicagoland area. When I'm not teaching about communication theory or mass communication, I have a background in consultancy and public relations, and so I think about the branding purposes of some of the situations that we're faced with today. In this particular example, the Gore versus Krepo situation. Now, some of us have different understandings or level of intimate knowledge when it comes to this situation. And so what I want to focus on is the background of the situation, what has unfolded, who bears the weight or the brunt of the responsibility, what has been done by the parties involved, and then what needs to be done. And it's worth noting that I have no affiliation with Riot Games or Twitch.tv or any of the League of Legends players or teams at all. Instead, this is me providing some insight and overview as to perhaps how to handle a situation like this, what was done well, and maybe some of the things that Riot and Twitch might want to consider moving forward. So to give us background on this Gore situation with Krepo, the first thing that we need to note, and if you're familiar with the situation, you can skip ahead, the time markers are listed below. The first thing that we need to note is some of the popularity elements that come into a situation with Gore, okay? So the first thing that I think of with this particular case, the case really starts with one famous Twitch streamer, well, I guess at this point, an ex-Twitch streamer, Gore, who had made comments in an hour-long rant video about a former League of Legends player and now employee of Riot Games in Krepo. And in this video, he goes on this rant saying that he had visited the EU LCS playoffs, H2K versus Fnatic, and while he was there, he had brought himself, his manager, and two women, and all expenses paid for the women, and they had went there anticipating whatever it is that they had hoped from these women. And somehow within that last night, the women had disappeared and went back, and he was embarrassed because it turns out, allegedly, that they had gone back with some of the members of the European LCS team Fnatic, specifically mentioned Forbidden and Reckless. So all of that we can kind of put to the side. We'll get to that part in a second. And in this enraged hour-long rant, he claims for Krepo, who we'll get to sort of the stats and importance of this in a second, that Krepo should not be talking and starting some of the conflict. If anyone should, it shouldn't be him, mostly because, as Gore alleges, that he had slept with someone who was 15 years old. Now, again, all this is alleged information, but what we know at this point is that it's slanderous in that it is theoretically damaging to whatever the reputation is for both Riot Games, for Gore, and some of the aftermath that we're seeing from this, and we'll actually pull it up right here. Some of the tweets from Krepo, we actually have to read it in ascending fashion, starting from the bottom. His immediate response to this is that he's not going to make any reactions to this. He says that they are false claims. Rumors are getting out of hand. And so we're starting to see allegations from Gore coming all the way through. People from the community are starting to respond to it, send messages to Mitch, who is Krepo. And at this point, he is making comments regarding the overall situation and stepping away from social media. So when we look at the situation in total, and I sort of flowcharted and diagrammed, we look at what I think as the start of the situation. Now, there are going to be arguments made as to the people who inform Gore. We're going to operate under the assumption, for better or worse, that at some point Gore has come across the information that Krepo has slept with a 15-year-old. Again, we have no idea whether or not any of this is true, but that is the situation that we're at. I think about branding and public relations from the perspective, from crisis communication from the perspective of a natural disaster. And it might be a byproduct of me taking my capstone public relations courses at the same time that I was taking natural disaster course. But I think about the ripple effect that happens with the sending of information. And as you can see to the right here, we have other defamation examples that have happened in popular media. So this isn't the first time that one individual or one organization has made false claims about someone else. And as a result of that, we have seen hundreds of millions of dollars in defamation lawsuits happening. We'll see if something happens with Gore and Krepo. Now, what we have to consider is how all of this sort of transcends forward and who are the parties involved and who's responsible for it. So right off the bat, we're just going to put the blame and responsibility onto Gore. He owns this. It's his responsibility for that. The first party involved, as we'll start to see it unfold here, is Krepo. And Krepo, with the responses that we've seen so far, says that he's not going to respond to the allegations other than they're false. But we also see, as the trickle-down effect happens with this, that Shox becomes intertwined at some point. Some point in the community, it's Shox's younger sister that's involved. Regardless of if that's true or not, or if any of this is true, we start to think person one or organization one that the responsibility falls upon is Riot Games. And it falls upon Riot Games for really two critical reasons. Critical reason one is that this individual is famous, Gore is famous for playing their game. And component number two is that Krepo and Shox are both analysts and hosts for the European League of Legends Championship Series, which is the big season-long event, multiple season-long event throughout the year, hosted and facilitated by none other than Riot Games, their game League of Legends. These individuals are pretty big personalities. And when I say pretty big personalities, I actually wrote down some numbers just for clarity's sake to think about the reach of this message, of these allegations. We'll start with Gore, who is not employed by Riot. 12.7 million views on Twitch.tv compared to Krepo's 26.8 million lifetime views. Gore has 240,000 followers on Twitch.tv to Krepo's 308,000. On YouTube, Gore is the only one of these three, Krepo, Shox, and Gore. Gore has 196,000 subscribers. And then if we look at Twitter, which all three of them happen to have, Gore has 29,000 followers, Krepo has 294,000, and Shox has 389,000. So all of a sudden, even if there is no overlap or even half overlap, we are seeing quite literally hundreds of thousands of people getting involved, including members of Riot staff. So the first responsibility and the onus comes onto Riot Games. So when we think about other organizations, like let's say a professional sports team, when one of the professional players or when someone has been indicted for an illegal crime or maybe even a sex scandal, there's usually some sort of press release that comes out. And the press release is at least the acknowledgement that yes, as Riot Games, we understand that there have been allegations made. At this point, we don't have anything else to add other than we are currently investigating the allegations about Krepo and the streamer Gore. Unfortunately, we don't see that from Riot Games. And again, this isn't necessarily the best approach that I'm suggesting, but instead we're thinking about it from the perspective of if me as the casual viewer can find out information by going on to the League of Legends subreddit, and I can watch an hour-long video where someone is defaming one of your employees, I would hope that you, in response, would make a comment. Now, the comment doesn't have to be you acknowledging and accepting that Krepo is actually guilty of whatever it is that he's being accused of, but instead saying we're going to investigate it just like you did when it came to Deficio and Dentist, and we, of course, have the competitive ruling that comes through. Okay, so Riot Games, and we'll come back to them in a second, because what Twitch does in response to this is actually a little bit more forthcoming and telling as to how the organizations run this. So for the Gore situation, this is actually the third time, the third final strike in him and his Twitch streaming career. He has been, within the past couple of years, I think the past year actually, has been indicted in 2 times for violating the rules of harassment. And finally, this third time, Gore's stream is taken down entirely. And when we think about a game like League of Legends and how it is that we see this, let's go ahead and pull up League of Legends right here. We go into Google, we look up League of Legends, we're scrolling through. If we click the news and we scroll all the way to the bottom, we're starting to see the explosion of League of Legends and esports growth, right? We're seeing things like a clueless sports fan's guide to League of Legends from Fox Sports, a beginner's guide to watching competitive League of Legends from SB Nation, and then when we get to the very top, the only information that we have is from iDigital Times, and if we click this link, lo and behold, we have this story that we're talking about right now. So we don't have a formalized statement from Riot Games about one of their employees being Krepo, and instead we have something that is being basically extrapolated here about Gore. So let's go back and think about Gore as a Twitch streamer who has a partnership with Twitch, despite these first 2 strikes and the third one that eventually terminates his profile. So he has the ability as a partner to get subscribers. He has a ton of subscribers. And as a result, we think about the power that comes with that, the gravitas that comes with having that much ownership and that much power. And so Twitch decides in this moment, boom, we're done. We're completely permanent banning you. And later on, Gore comes out to say his life is now devoid of meaning. He's upset. He's been banned from Twitch. All of his life and livelihood has sort of fallen apart. So we see a response from Twitch in regard to one of the people that, as a privately run organization, they have control. You can stream, but we'll control whether or not the content that you get is in violation of our harassment policy, our zero tolerance policy, which it is. You're done. Unfortunately, in this circumstance with Riot Games, we don't have this public message that's being sent out that we're investigating this. Instead, we have to go to the person themselves in Krepo. All of a sudden, that's not great. So the second element here with Riot Games is that we're seeing the teams that are now in question actually have to have some sort of message that is being sent to the players and then the players to the rest of the community. And it's not to say that Riot hasn't reached out to teams like Fnatic and Cloud9 and TSM and said, hey, we're very much so aware of what's going on with Krepo. We haven't publicly set out to talk about it, which, again, that's the decision of Riot Games. I'm sure they have more than competent people having these conversations already, and they have been for the past 2 days. But in the message that Riot sends to the teams and to the employees, one of the critical elements that they need to include is that this is a very, very high-risk situation, because not only is the threat for a company like Riot Games sort of in question here, but we also think about it from the teams and the different organizations that actually sponsor the teams as well. So the next step past this is how the diffusion of knowledge comes about. And there was a video that surfaced of Sneaky's stream. Sneaky is a player on Cloud9, and on Sneaky's stream, there were a bunch of people that were donating, pretending to be Riot employees for all of the quote-unquote dank memes. So Sneaky, for the most part, has been well known and well regarded as someone who has fun, is able to poke fun at other people. But again, this is a really, really high-risk situation. There's a lot at stake when it comes to accusations of a Riot employee sexually harassing, or potentially raping a 15-year-old. Now, the message from Riot needs to be, in my opinion, you should completely, if you plan on streaming, you can still stream. If you do text to talk, so when the donations come through, it is sort of read through the speaker, make sure that you make it clear to your audience that topic, the topic of Krepo, of Gore, and sleeping with a 15-year-old and involving shocks here, all of that is completely off limits. And I understand on a very, very basic level that Sneaky has a very well framed and monetized stream. He makes a lot of money off of these quote-unquote dank packaged memes, right? But unfortunately, there's much more at stake for Cloud9, for Jack, the owner of Cloud9, and Riot Games as an entity. So, and this is in the description below, so in a video where Sneaky is getting donation after donation that continue to reference this sexual harassment of a 15-year-old, we're running into a huge issue. And the huge issue isn't just with Sneaky, and it's not just with Cloud9 or Riot Games, but it also involves Twitch, because Sneaky is using the platform. Now, what we're seeing is that the community is driving a lot of these conversations, right? The community is driving a lot of these comments about the 15-year-old, and they're pushing this conversation along. Sneaky himself is not saying that, 15-year-old sex with a 15-year-old is appropriate in any way. Instead, what's happening within this circumstance is that the conversation is being driven by the community, which as a result means that Twitch, unfortunately, should be getting involved. We want content creators, but at what cost? At what point do we actually talk about the responsibility that needs to be had from the community itself? Think about you in this circumstance where your fame is on the line, where your entire brand and the way that you monetize your content is completely at risk because someone has accused you of a heinous crime, whether it's true or not. Think about the permanent damage that is being put onto Krepo's life. Not even just Krepo as an individual that works for Riot Games, but Krepo if he decides to not work for Riot Games. Krepo as someone who is being harassed consistently on social media, as he listed, he's being harassed on Snapchat, he's being harassed on YouTube, on Twitch, on Twitter, okay? More importantly, we need some ownership from the people like Cloud9 and Sneaky to be able to say, hey, look, Everything in terms of being silly and being outrageous is perfectly fine and acceptable. We need you to not talk about this topic. That needs to be something that is articulated from the very top of Riot Games and trickles all the way down. Because this is a huge deal for a company that is really trying to gain legitimacy. Now, unfortunately, the legitimacy that's being had between esports and traditional sports has to do with a sex scandal involving a young girl. Is that the brand, is that the reputation that we want to maintain? And if it's not, the sponsors need to be able to understand and articulate the notion that we want nothing to do with this. Companies like Logitech and Quest bars, individuals who are literally dumping hundreds, if not thousands of dollars into these organizations, into these infrastructures, need to recognize that this is completely off topic. There's no joking about sex with a 15-year-old. Conversation over. Any semblance that this is being talked about, we immediately have to pull it. Gone. And that has to be done by everyone involved. It has to be done, the ownership has to go on to Riot, it has to go on Twitch, which Twitch has already done a good job terminating Gore's account, and it has to be done by the teams and the individuals. I understand there is the need to make money, and this is a cash cow. People are donating money, pretending to be deficio, pretending to be freak, so that they could talk about this topic. Unfortunately, money aside, the damage to the reputation that's being had, there's no coming back from that. The money that you are making right now, as sort of being the butt of the jokes and helping to perpetuate that, it's going to cripple you as an organization. So from a branding perspective, from a public relations perspective, we need to rethink the way that we're having these conversations, and we need to make more immediate and purposeful suggestions and public statements to other people. Gore said that Forbidden and Reckless of Team Fnatic were involved sleeping with these women. Guess who else is a former player? Krepo. Krepo has been accused of sleeping with a 15-year-old. Krepo is associated with Riot Games, who's associated with Fnatic, who's associated with Reckless, and Forbidden. So what's to say that people who are endorsing these individual players, who are paying money for their jerseys, for their merchandise, to attend LCS games, are going to keep coming? I don't think you'd find an individual company or a collaboration of companies that are willing to spend a lot of money on a tarnished reputation because someone has slept with a 15-year-old. So we need a public apology. We need a public statement. We need acknowledgement. And if we don't get that, well, we're going to be in this circumstance for a lot longer. And the longer we wait, the longer we decide to make a public statement and pursue this a little bit further, the worse the situation is going to get. And until we do something from a branding perspective, we're just here wondering, will Riot actually say something?